For the latest, we're joined by reporters Steph Ferrier in Melbourne and Antoinette Collins in Sydney. Good morning to both of you. Steph, I'd like to start with you because of this state of emergency bill that passed the upper house in Victoria very late last night.
Yes, good morning, Lisa. It certainly was a marathon sitting in the upper house that ended just before 2 o'clock this morning. But in the end, the government got the extension it needed to avoid what it calls public health anarchy and literally falling off a cliff here without it. There were heated arguments from some crossbenchers against it and also the opposition MPs who accused the Premier of being driven by a lust for power and failing to act sooner to allow time for proper debate. In the end, it got over the line only just with the support of a few crossbenchers and a Greens MP who came back from maternity leave early with her 8-week-old daughter. She says it was just too important not to return to vote. It wasn't all the government's way though. They only got half of the 12-month term or extension that they were looking for, and they'll also have to justify each month why that extension should remain. Now, hopefully those powers won't need to be used as much because yesterday we had 5 deaths and just 70 new cases reported, although that does come off a very low testing rate, only half of the 20,000 benchmark that authorities say they need to understand just how quickly they can come out of these lockdowns when they end on September the 13th. And the Premier says on Sunday he will now reveal details of 2 roadmaps, one for Melbourne and one for country Victoria, which will have less restrictions because there are fewer case numbers there.
And Antoinette, in Sydney, what's happening with the latest cases there in New South Wales?
Well, Lisa, the Sydney CBD cluster still remains the focus of the COVID outbreak that authorities are working on. Of the 13 new cases recorded across the state yesterday, 7 of those are linked to that cluster that's sort of centred around that City Tattersall Club gym. That now stands at a total of 41. 3 of the new cases, though, however, are connected to St Paul's Catholic College at Greystanes in Western Sydney. Now, there's a total of 6 students there that have contracted the virus, and now the entire Year 10 group of around 136 children in total have all been deemed close contacts, and they're now in self-isolation for 14 days and will be tested. Another Western Sydney school, Girraween Public School, has also been forced to close because of another case there, and a North Shore childcare centre, Redham Early Learning Centre at Linfield on the city's North Shore. There are 2 more cases there, and the entire school is closed and isolated for a fortnight. Now, while the cluster of the CBD is the main focus, there are now calls from the Deputy Premier John Barilaro for restrictions to ease in regional areas where there are fewer cases. He's arguing that New South Wales should follow the lead of Victoria and start to have different rules for regional towns. At the moment, it is a uniform approach across the state. The Premier's said that, she's following the health advice and it is open to perhaps considering more flexibility in regional areas, but it also comes amid concerns about large-scale events. Now, the Tamworth Country Music Festival, which sees around 40,000 people descend on the city in January, it seems unlikely that that will go ahead. And John Barilaro is arguing, well, if regional events have to be axed, then so too do major city events, and that includes Sydney's New Year's Eve fireworks, which he is saying it seems inevitable that it will be cancelled. The City of Sydney's yet to make a decision on that. They're obviously going to be taking the advice of New South Wales Police, but it does seem unlikely that an event which sees more than 1 million people gather around the Sydney Harbour foreshore is likely to go ahead. But of course, John Barilaro is saying that, it's been a very rough year for those in the bush after bushfires and drought, and that restrictions should be eased for things like formals and weddings so that regional communities have something to look forward to after a pretty tough year.
Yeah, Antoinette, good point. Thank you to both of you. Another big story this morning we've been following is comments by former Prime Minister Tony Abbott overnight. He was speaking at a think tank in London where he said that it's time to have some uncomfortable conversations perhaps about the cost of the process that we've been undergoing to try and deal with this pandemic.
Let's hear now from the former Prime Minister.
Given that lockdowns can reduce disease but not eliminate it, the result is not just a stop-start economy, but a stop-start life. In this climate of fear, It was hard for governments to ask how much is a life worth, because every life is precious and every death is sad. Governments have approached the pandemic like trauma doctors instead of thinking like health economists trained to pose uncomfortable questions about a level of deaths we might have to live with.
Tony Abbott there with a variation on the commentary that has been run by some high-profile columnists since the pandemic began, which in a nutshell is that people in nursing homes are old, they're going to die anyway, so do we weigh their inevitable deaths up and focus more on preserving the livelihoods of younger Australians? That argument was shot down by the current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, only a couple of weeks ago. Mr Morrison described that point of view, his words, as both hideous and immoral.
Rick wrote in, said it's very un-Australian. The old-timers helped build this country and he wants to roll the dice with their lives. And Jill says, well, we can never know how many lives of all ages have been saved through the restrictions the majority of us have lived with and abided by. I, for one, am happy to never find out.
Emma says, we should be celebrating our low COVID-19 numbers. She goes on to say, I'm not prepared to lose vulnerable members of my family and friends so that politicians can count money. She finishes by saying, we're a society, not an economy. And lots of comments, people also coming in it from the other side saying, well, he's got a point, you know, my job is on the line, my business is suffering, we have to open up and have these uncomfortable questions about just how much we are prepared to live with in terms of older members of our society dying from this disease.
You can send your emails, Twitter, Facebook, let us know. We want to continue this conversation. It has clearly got a lot of you talking this morning.
Australia is today expected to record its biggest drop in GDP since the Great Depression, as the true economic cost of the virus becomes clearer. Economists expect the June quarter national accounts to show a drop of up to 6% in GDP, confirming that Australia is officially in its first recession in a generation. It'll also give us a further insight into just which industries are being hardest hit by COVID-19. Federal Parliament has approved an extension of the JobKeeper wage subsidy until March next year. The $1,500 a fortnight rate will fall to $1,200 for full-time workers in 4 weeks' time, and then again to $1,000 in early January. Victoria's state of emergency has been extended by 6 months after an early morning vote in Parliament's upper house. The extension allows the Chief Health Officer to issue legally binding directives after September the 13th. But importantly, it doesn't mean existing restrictions will stay in place. The government will have to justify its case each month.